So I welcome everybody to our annual WILIG Career Roundtable, and my name is Yvonne Dutton, and I am the co-chair of WILIG, along with Meg de Guzman, a professor at Temple School of Law, and I am a professor at Indiana University, Robert H. McKinney School of Law in Indianapolis. We are thrilled that this event is also co-sponsored by the Minorities in International Law Interest Group, the Africa Interest Group, and the New Professionals Interest Group as well. I am going to first briefly introduce our speakers, and then I'm going to pose a number of questions to the participants for about 30 or 40 minutes, and then we will hopefully have a little bit of time for Q&A from the audience. And if you do have questions, you should put them in the Q&A function here on this webinar. So I'm going to keep these introductions brief since we only have about an hour here, but I want to give you just a little bit of the flavor of the amazing careers that our guest speakers have. So we have here on the screen Dean Karen Bravo from Indiana University McKinney School of Law, Lucia Solano, the legal advisor at the Permanent Mission of Colombia to the United Nations in New York, Floriane Lavaud, counsel at Debevoise and Plimpton in New York City, and Professor E.Tendayi, Achiume Alicia Mignana Professor of Law at the UCLA Law School. So I will start by telling you a little bit about Dean Karen Bravo. She was appointed Dean of the Indiana University Robert H. McKinney School of Law on July 1, 2020, following a national search. Dean Bravo joined the faculty in 2004, teaching international law, international trade law, and business courses. Her research interests include labor liberalization, personhood, slavery, and human trafficking. She is the founder and leader of the Slavery Past, Present, and Future Project, an interdisciplinary initiative that brings together scholars of slavery from a multiplicity of disciplines. She has filled a variety of leadership roles at ASIL, including the Teaching International Law Interest Group, the ASIL Executive Committee, and the ASIL Nominating Committee. I turn now to Lucia Solano, Colombian career diplomat and lawyer, who currently serves as legal advisor of the Permanent Mission of Colombia to the United Nations in New York. She has also been a member of Colombia's legal team in the cases her country faces before the International Court of Justice, which focus on the law of the sea and maritime law matters. From 2018 to 2021, she held the position of head of the Treaty Office, International Law Directorate at the Colombian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Between 2013 and 2018, she was designated as legal advisor in the Colombian Embassy in The Hague. Before that, she worked for 3 years in the Treaty Office of the Colombian Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Bogota. She teaches international law, diplomatic and consular law, and law of the sea. She is also the coordinator for the mentoring program for WILIG of ASIL, and is on the advisory board to the interest group in international courts and tribunals of ASIL. Now turning to Floriane Lavaud, she serves as counsel at the law firm of Debevoise and Plimpton in the firm's International Dispute Resolution Group in New York and Paris. Her practice focuses on public international law and international arbitration, with a particular emphasis on the Middle East. Ms. Lavaud advises and represents multinational corporations and sovereign states on issues of civil and common law, public international law, and treaty and contract interpretation. For example, she represented the state of Qatar before the International Court of Justice and the International Civil Aviation Organization, in addition to representing Qatari entities in both treaty and commercial arbitrations. In her capacity as pro bono counsel, she worked with Legal Action Worldwide to seek justice for the Rohingya before the International Criminal Court and for the Tigrayan people before the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. She has also worked with the Clooney Foundation for Justice on a number of cases seeking the release of unlawfully imprisoned journalists, including Paul Chiuta, a Cameroonian journalist who was released in May 2021 after nearly 2 years in arbitrary detention. Now, Professor E.Tendayi Achiume is the inaugural Alicia Mignana Professor of Law and former faculty director of the UCLA Law Promise Institute for Human Rights. She is also a research associate with the African Center for Migration and Society at the University of Witwatersrand. The current focus of her work is the global governance of racism and xenophobia and the legal and ethical implications of colonialism for contemporary international migration. In November 2017, the United Nations Human Rights Council appointed Professor Achiume the UN Special Rapporteur on contemporary forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance, making her the first woman to serve in this role since its creation in 1993. In 2016, she was appointed to co-chair the 2016 annual meeting of ACIL, and she is former co-chair of the ACIL Migration Law Interest Group. So I hope that has been a brief introduction, but you get a flavor for our distinguished panelists here today. And I'm going to start it off with just sort of an overarching question for the panelists, and I am going to ask every panelist to answer this question. And I will start with Dean Bravo. We'll just go in the order of the introductions for this one to make this easy. The first question is, could you briefly describe your career trajectory for us? What drew you to this field of international law? And what are some of the joys and challenges of your job now, or some of the many, positions that you have held already? So I'll turn it to Dean Bravo, and then when we're finished, I will move us along to our next panelist. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much, Yvonne, and thank you so much to Willig and ACIL for hosting this panel and for inviting me to participate. I will also say that I'm quite overawed at my co-panelists and all their achievements. So I will try briefly to respond to those questions. So my own trajectory going into law school, I knew that I was interested in international law, I think because I come from a small island and was always conscious that there was a power dynamic. So the small island being Jamaica, and always conscious of there being a power dynamic and the movements of politics, law, etc. So that really drew me such that I studied international law as part of my JD. I then went into law firms in New York City and Boston, did some corporate work that involved international law. But once I had decided I wanted more, I went to the Republic of Armenia under the American Bar Association's Central European and Eurasian Law Initiative. Now, the focus there was on both human trafficking as well as elections and the rule of law generally. So being on the ground and learning about those topics, I frankly had not known that human trafficking existed until I was there in 2002 to 2003, when it first, even presented itself to me. So that was a really fundamental cause of my focusing on human trafficking. As I said, I didn't realize that it existed. But while I was in Armenia, I worked on those projects, really saw the nature of law and the importation or attempted importation of law, and that sometimes it doesn't work. In fact, mostly it doesn't work, that you need that ground up participation from people of that particular country, that particular culture, to express what it is that they want. I left Armenia, went to NYU to do a master's in law in trade regulation. So international trade regulation, and that was spurred by, once again, being Jamaican and trying to understand the bananas controversy. So you may not recall, but there was a huge case in the WTO regarding access to the European markets by American bananas. The African, Caribbean, and Pacific bananas had preferential access. And as a Jamaican, I didn't understand what's wrong with our preferential access. After all, we're former colonies. We deserve the right to be there. And it was while I was at NYU that I put together the human rights tragedy of human trafficking with the trade law, right? So trade and slavery, trade and people, the economics of it all, which then brought me to academia and the fact that I then focused on these topics, blending what would seem to be public international law, but really as well private international law, and centering economics as opposed to human rights alone in trying to understand that multidisciplinary phenomenon of human trafficking. And then you also asked other things that I'm sure I'm forgetting and I'm rambling on.
No. Just if you have a moment to just say a challenge or a joy of, being in this field or having worked in this field of international law.
Excellent, excellent. So the challenge would be working on a topic that is so emotional, right? You're at a remove, but the human rights violations, the experiences are so extreme. But I'm working at a remove because I am coming from the academic perspective. So that's a challenge. The joy is having the ability to focus on the issue, to really study it and to share that perspective through writing, but also sharing that perspective with students so that in my view, the human rights perspective is very important with respect to human trafficking. But if we are to actually prevent it, if we are to solve it, then you've got to have the economics included. From my perspective, human rights saying, okay, you've breached human rights and this is how we're going to punish it. There's going to be more people who then we have to keep helping them. How do we prevent it? We have to look at the economic structure. And I think E.Tendayi's work about the legacies of colonization in today's migration, that's it. I think we'll have to talk, but I'll end there and let you move on to our other panelists. So thank you.
Perfect. I'm going to turn it to Lucia Solano to sort of answer. Hopefully you have those questions in mind now and can share with us.
Thank you so much, Yvonne, and thank you to Willig and to Azel for this invitation. I come from a small Colombian town, and when I was little, I would never have thought I would be here with you today. I'm very proud of of just being here. Is just a major accomplishment for me. I really just I just lived in this city. I liked everything international. I liked languages. I studied like English by myself. Like learning like Britney Spears, the lyrics and things like that. And I just felt, okay, how do I, join these things I'm supposed to be good at with my interest, which has always been, especially being Colombian, of, helping Colombians overcome many of the challenges that we have. And I always thought we're not going to be able to do this alone. We're going to need, external help. We're going to need help from other countries. And I do believe that international law is the best way to solve global problems, right? So I always had this feeling that there was something out there in the international community that I could contribute to. So with that in mind, it has been really most of my career has been a little bit of luck and a little bit of just being there and just being very engaged and very intentional about everything I do. I'm very passionate. I'm very Colombian in that regard. I feel and I dream and I'm very Latin. So I've always lived in that with that perspective. So I started to to study law, and I had a very bad international law teacher, I have to confess. And I was like, is this the way? I'm not sure. So then I applied to an LLM. I did the LLM, and that changed everything, because I saw other people who had the same concerns that I had, came from many different countries that really were much smarter than me. And I was like, okay, I want to know these people. I want to talk to them. I want to be like them. So it sort of pushed me forward, like it made me study more and be better and like work harder. And with that, I just, out of luck again, on the way back to Colombia after doing the LLM, and having applied to every single international organization there was in Washington and New York, and I never, not even got an interview. I sent like 300,000 applications. I know, too many. When I was on the way back home, the woman sitting next to me on the plane started talking about the diplomatic career, and I had never, heard that there was something called, diplomatic foreign service or anything like that. So when I arrived home, I just applied and I just got in, and it sort of has been the right people at the right time in all of my process. And I started to do international law. I always, I've been always in the foreign service doing international law matters, a little bit because I was lucky, but also because I slowly became an expert, at least for the Colombian standards. And I just, then I was posted in The Hague, and in The Hague, I was in charge of the ICJ cases. And then on the way back home, because you have to be, abroad and then come back home for a few years, at least in the Colombian, way of doing things. When I went back home, I was in the treaties office for all these years. And then there was this opening in New York for the legal advisor. And it was just, the person who was there called me and said, you should be here. And I was like, okay. So I ended up in New York, which was the dream. It was always my dream. This is the place where you do international law. This is the place where I can do something for Colombians through international law. Now, the concern is now what? I made it to the dream. So what happens next? And I guess I'm going to have to, create new dreams, and we'll see what happens. But I've been just, like very, very active and very involved and in everything I can do. And I go to every conference, and I also teach. So I am like a little bit everywhere, which is good, and I'm very active, so I love it. And that's how I ended up, getting very involved with ASO, and now coordinating the mentoring program, which is like my, most, best achievement so far. So I'm very, very, very happy about that.
Excellent. And we are going to turn back to mentoring shortly. So we will come back to that. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Floriane Lavaud to share a little bit of her background.
Thank you, Yvonne, and thank you, ASOL, as well, for the invitation. It's really wonderful to be here among very distinguished panelists, as Karen said, and thank you for the kind introduction. So my career is a bit, I guess, peculiar in the sense that I actually started working in-house. I was working at Total in Paris, the oil and gas company, and so my exposure to international law was more commercial, I would say, at least in the earlier part of my career, before I joined Debevoise, which, as you know, is a very special place. It is, yes, a law firm, but we get to work on very exciting cases. So very early on in my career, I started working on cases involving, for example, human rights. I'll take the example that Yvonne mentioned in the introduction. We represented the state of Qatar, and it was a special case because it required a lot of travel, spending a lot of time on the ground, and really hearing from the witnesses directly, giving them a voice, hearing how they have been impacted by the measures taken by the neighboring states. And to me, this was almost like an eye-opener, because it really allowed me to really assess how, as a lawyer, you have a special set of skills that can really help others, whether it's just being in the same room and just allowing people just to air their concerns, air their grievances, and then being able to communicate that or translate that in legal documents and present it to the court. That's what we did in the case against the UAE, where we're representing Qatar before the International Court of Justice. And we met with hundreds of Qataris who had been affected by the measures. And I was, I think, going back to your question about challenges and joy, I really share the sentiment that Karen shared at the beginning, which is that, it is very emotional, of course, to hear those people share those really difficult stories, how families were separated, how people were living in one country and had to leave this country overnight. It was very emotional, but at the same time, as challenging as it was to hear the stories, it was such a joy to be able to give a voice to those people and to serve as a vehicle, really, to help them address the International Court of Justice, as is the case in the particular case that I mentioned. But we also representing Tigrayan victims. We're representing 7 million Tigrayan victims currently before the African Commission on humans and people's rights. And just all those, I think, experiences really have drawn me into international law and have allowed me to really appreciate the power of international law and why international law matters and what we can do as lawyers really to help others.
Excellent. And I'm seeing a lot of passion from all of our panelists, and I think this is terrific. And I know we're going to hear more from Professor Achiume, if you would share with us as well.
Absolutely. Yvonne, thanks for the gift of being able to be on a panel with this amazing group of women. And like Lucia, I have to say, this was never something I imagined was in my future when I got started on this path. So I'll keep it brief, because in some ways, this question that you asked us could be the subject of endless webinars in and of itself. So I'm going to fight the urge to go on and on. But so when I started out, I went to law school actually because I had taken an undergraduate seminar on law and international development policies with Bernadette Atuehene, which some of you may know. She's a professor, a law professor now as well, and she taught a very powerful seminar on law and international development. And I'm Southern African, but found myself at university in the US. And there was something about that course that exposed me to the role that international law played in structuring the conditions in the parts of the world that I cared the most about. So I thought, okay, I'll go into international law because I care about making the part of the world that I'm from a better place. And this seems like a tool or a set of tools that could be really powerful in that regard. So I actually started out interested in international development, and then in law school, interested in human rights. So when I was in law school, I lived in the International Human Rights Clinic. It's what grounded my law school experience when everything felt so alienating. I remember being in torts and all of these other courses and thinking, what am I doing with my life? But really coming alive when I was in the clinic, because it felt like this was a space where I could connect with the issues that I cared about. So in many ways, law school for me was about trying to figure out where in the field of international human rights I wanted to be. So I used my summers for exploration. I initially thought I wanted to be an international criminal lawyer, which is laughable to me now, because nothing about me is a litigator. And also I have deep misgivings about international criminal law, but that's where I started out. And so it was a journey within law school. And I would say even the first 6 to 8 years after law school were about experimentation and trying to understand what within international law was a good intellectual, emotional, psychic, and kind of just like day-to-day fit for what I cared about. And I have to be honest that being a law professor is the last thing that I thought it would be. So I went to school with people who knew they wanted to be law professors, and I always laughed at them because I thought, who wants to do that job? If you really care about the world, why are you going to go and lock yourself up in a law school to do that type of work? So when I graduated, I wanted to do direct legal services work, being a human rights lawyer representing migrants and refugees. And I actually was fortunate enough to have a job doing that. I worked at Lawyers for Human Rights in South Africa after I clerked. I did an international clerkship I did a clerkship on the South African Constitutional Court, and then I started working for Lawyers for Human Rights. And that was a very powerful experience, but it was also during that experience that I realized that I had been wrong about what I thought my dream job was. It was profoundly transformative to work directly with asylum seekers and refugees, but it was also emotionally heavy. And those of you who've done direct legal services work or know people who do direct legal services work, it's very intense emotional work, and it wasn't a good fit for me from that perspective. Not because I don't think emotions are important, but because the job was depressing me, and I wanted to be in the work in ways that were sustainable. And at the same time, I was also realizing that I was really frustrated with practicing law because law itself was frustrating to me. So I wanted to look for the kind of work that had me not just in the law, but also thinking and doing stuff about the law. So I started teaching part-time at a university. This was in South Africa. It was a human rights course, and it started out as just a way for me to reflect on the human rights framework and the challenges that I was having. And I realized I really loved it. I loved teaching, I loved engaging with students, and I loved the space that it provided me to think. So I thought, okay, well, maybe I'll try this clinical teaching path. So, and I, in law school, had really inspiring clinical professors and fellows, and thought these are people who are in an academic institution who get to work on cases, but also have, you know, the space within an academic institution to think about policy and to try and influence it as well. And prior to doing that, I spent 2 years at a law firm. So I practiced at Sullivan and Cromwell in New York. I spent a year actually at Sullivan and Cromwell doing securities litigation stuff, which was a very terrible fit for me. Some people thrive in law firm context. I was shriveling in the law firm context, and it's so it became clear for me that that wasn't a thing that I was going to do. But while I was there, I started applying for clinical teaching fellowships. And ended up at UCLA in a fellowship that actually required academic writing as well. And I thought to myself, okay, well, that's not the thing that I came here for. I want to think about the things that I care about, but this academic writing thing feels like a thing that I might just have to do to get the job. And I ended up loving it. I ended up loving the mix of, you know, having academic space to really think deeply and even provocatively about the things that I really cared about, while also having some clinical work that kept me working on cases and connected to individuals, so that I never really felt untethered from the things that had brought me into the academy in the first place. And I would say that it was only after 8 years, 6 to 8 years after graduating from law school, that I really found the vehicle that allowed me to be in international law the way that was a good fit. And so while I was an assistant professor, I applied for the rapporteurship. I'm happy to talk more about what that process was like, and surprisingly got it. So I wear a hat as an independent expert as well. And that has continued to fulfill my desire to be thinking more at a level of policy and structure about the things that I care about. And very quickly, I think the joys of my job are being able to work on the questions that I think really, really matter. And I think that's such a luxury. You know, your job is the thing that pays the bills, but to also have it be something that has you thinking hard about the things that you care about feels like the deepest privilege. And I think the challenge is related to something that Karen said. I think just repeated exposure to extreme human rights violations. And when you're working on racism, you're doing it in a context where even liberal institutions are structured by systemic racism. So the problems are inside and outside, and the powerlessness that can be accompanied by, you know, being in this work, I think is really, really difficult.
Excellent. Thank you to all of our panelists. I think this has, I think the descriptions from everyone has, hopefully the participants have seen there are so many options. I think that's one thing that we can see in international law, and that all of our panelists have done some searching, right, to find the thing that really resonated with them, and that was their real passion. And I think that's something that I think young folks going into this can keep in mind, right? That you might not find the first job might not be it, but keep looking, right, for the thing that you're going to love. I have a couple of questions now, and I think I want to get volunteers from our panelists. One is, has mentoring played a role in your career trajectory? And the other is, somewhat related, which is, what advice would you give to a younger person starting out, a young woman starting out, perhaps looking for a job in international law? What kinds of strategies or networking or volunteering or skills should be, what would you advise? So let me, I'm just going to pick on Lucia to answer her choice, and then I will pick on some other panelists afterwards.
Thank you so much, Yvonne, for the opportunity, because I think this is key for me. It has been all of my life that I've been running into people who have become mentors, and there's no such thing as mentoring programs in Colombia, right? It's not an institutionalized thing; it just sort of happen along the way. But now that I am sort of coordinating this mentoring program in ASO within the WILIG, I see the value, right? And I understand that there were mentors in my path that I didn't recognize at the moment as mentors, just people that, gave me an advice here and there, and I didn't know they would become, and in the end now are are my mentors. So I believe that mentorship, it's, it teaches you so many things that you will not be able to learn otherwise. You can study the law, you can, but there are things that in your day-to-day work where you really, some guidance, it's welcome, and that's where mentors come in. So I think that, it gives you self-confidence to have a mentor. It gives you self-awareness. It permits you to sort of strengthen your communication skills, because you talk about things in a more free way, and you get, the language to express certain things that you maybe don't know how to say. And, the mentors can teach you how to do that. It gives you, empathy in the end, right? You understand other people's experiences, and you learn from those too. And you learn to sort of be connected emotionally to other people who are perhaps, opening doors also, and you sort of follow their path. So I really have been lucky to encounter mentors. But to be honest, in the beginning, they were men, especially in public international law, especially in litigation before the International Court of Justice. It's just men. It's just white men, mostly. That's starting to change. See Floriane, or see, other people in the field, but it's just like one woman in a mostly male team. And in my case, in the case of the Colombian team, it was one woman who came in sort of later, and it was just her and me. We were the only two women in the group of 30 people. So you just bond with that other woman because you feel the same sort of like it feels strange. In my team, she was the counsel where nobody really paid it the same attention as the guys, right? So I just we learn along the way, and this counsel in the Colombian team became my mentor. We just came out to sort of bend, and it's everything I know now, I've learned thanks to her. And obviously she's a more experienced professional than I am, so I've learned from her experiences too. And the other thing that I think it's good though, it's that as I said, this is starting to change, and I think that's the goal of the mentoring program of ASO. I think that, just now we just finished collecting the applications, and it's 3 times larger than what it was last year, which was already a record. You didn't know this, Yvonne, but we'll get there. It's huge amount of people who applied this year.
Excellent.
It's awesome. I'm so happy about that, because it means that people really need that mentorship, but also that, there's something that we're doing well, and that mentoring really can affect in a positive way, the path of many, younger professionals that really need, have questions and want, some guidance. So I'm very pleased about that. We'll see what,
Yes, and that's a great plug for our mentoring program. So I love that. Let me see if I can turn it to Karen. Anything you want to add on, either of these sort of topics that I mentioned, advice or mentoring?
Yeah, these are both really important issues or questions. So with respect to mentoring, I would echo something that Lucia said, which is looking back, you realized you had mentors, whether it was someone who spoke to you, gave you advice. It may have been brief advice, a critical meeting that you had that opened up possibilities for you. And I would count that as mentorship. I would say that earlier in my career, I didn't know that I had mentors, but I look back now to those sometimes critical meetings and advice. Okay, this might be a good thing for you to try, and you try it and you see possibilities opening up. She also said something very important about the nature of your mentors. You don't know who that mentor might be. It may not be the person who looks like you. It may not be the person of your gender. It will be someone who sees something in you worthy of development because it sparks an interest in them. So I say, come to all your endeavors with a passion, right? The passion that you have. Bring yourself every day, because you never know. There will be someone who's seeing something that you are doing, and they will either mentor you or sponsor you. And so I want to make a difference between mentorship and sponsorship. the mentor is giving you advice. It might be a long-term mentor and you're going along. Somebody who sponsors you is a person who, like Yvonne, she's putting together a panel and she says, let's send an invitation to this person, or they're putting on a symposium. Let's send an invitation to that person, or someone is asked for a recommendation. These people are putting you out there because of what you have been doing in your career. So let's recognize the crucial role of both of these kinds of folks, and that they can be from anywhere in your life, whether while you're a student, really going gangbusters, writing your notes, or being involved in a student group, or as you are working, whether at a firm or in public international law. I do want to also say, though, the advice I would say, try different things. I think as we've been talking about international law, we've been talking about public international law mostly, but I like to point out to students that private international law is an offshoot of public international law. And you can put together areas such as, okay, public international law, we've got treaties regarding intellectual property, but if you're going to practice international law, it's going to be basically private international law, representing clients across the globe according to the ways in which the international treaties have then been domesticated in different countries, and you're practicing internationally. So keep really an open mind regarding what field, what specialization will you go into, and some part of it will be luck. Some part of it will be being in the right place at the right time, or taking a risk, volunteering, doing an externship, going to a foreign country to do the Peace Corps, whatever it may be, and it's going to open your eyes to, like, human trafficking for me. I didn't know this thing existed. How will you then incorporate that into your way of thinking and your way of working? So being open, being, I won't say like passionate as in, just giving your wholehearted self to the endeavors that you engage in. And I think that will serve you well, even at the times when it may feel discouraging. Lucia talked about sending in the 300,000 resumes, right? But I'm sure in sending out the 300,000 resumes, it caused her to think about, who am I? What do I want to do? So even the process of the 300,000 resumes makes you think about, what do I want to do, and narrow down your focus as well. So all of that is worthwhile, even when being discouraged. And let me plug ASIL, right? ASIL, join ASIL. Come to the annual meeting or the mid-year meeting. You will meet with international lawyers in all fields, and they want to talk to you. You're a young lawyer. We want to talk to you. We want to know, what will you bring to help change the world? So come, be members, and we want to engage in you. So be brave.
Excellent. And I think that's right. We've seen a lot of amongst our panelists sort of willingness to be out there and jump at the opportunity that presents itself. We have seen that, and I think that's great advice. Tendayi, I'm going to shift the question just a tiny bit, which is there some advice you would have given to yourself, at the, now that you know what you know, if you were to go back, is there some other advice you would give yourself? And this is related to these questions as well.
I think I would tell my earlier self to have more faith in myself. It can be a hard thing to do, but I realize over the course of my career that the things that have been the areas in which I've had the greatest success and the things that have been most rewarding are very closely connected to things I believed and cared about when I was starting out, but didn't always have the confidence to know that that's where it would be. I remember when I went on the law teaching market, my paper was on structural xenophobic discrimination against refugees in South Africa. And that was 2013, at a time when some of the feedback I was getting was, how relevant is this really? How big a topic or important an issue is this for international lawyers, for people who are based in the global north? And fast forward to the world we're in now, where it's absolutely clear that it's a pressing issue, unfortunately. So I think trusting yourself, even when you're not getting the external signals that the thing that you care about is the central thing, I think is something that I would tell an earlier version of myself, and also remind myself that it's a marathon and it's not a sprint. It is if we're fortunate, we have many, many years to work on these issues, and even getting a sense for what you're good at and what you're not good at requires a lot of strength, stamina, and just remembering it's a marathon and not a sprint, I think, are two pieces of advice I'd give my earlier self. But I do want to say two things about the previous questions just very quickly. Just on mentoring, I've found that there's not a single person on this planet who you cannot learn from. And I think that really internalizing that, including some of the people who become the most difficult in your professional relationship, you can learn many things from them about, how not to get to the place where you're somebody who's ungenerous. But remembering that you can learn from everyone and having that be an asset that you hold dear, I think is important. Just echoing what Karen said, I think you need different kinds of mentors, even the ones that provide you support, the ones that give you comfort, the ones that challenge you, the ones that make you feel uncomfortable, and even the ones that I like to think of as sort of the haters in a way, the ones that kind of voice the doubt that you need to hear so that you figure out how you get over it. I think you want to diversify what types of mentors you have, because that's valuable. And then also say that peer connections are so important. Some of the best mentorship I've gotten has been from my peers. I think about somebody like Matiange Sirleaf. We went to law school together. She's now a professor as well, and just a phenomenal professor. But I think about all of the ways in which her support has been pivotal to my own journey. I think we sometimes underestimate the importance of remaining connected to our peers and thinking of them and ourselves being resources to our peers. And then finally, just on advice on finding a job in international law, the path is never linear. And I think being organized, being proactive, and being willing to work hard and pick yourself up when you get those rejections is just essential. I have a folder in my Gmail, which I've collected over the years, which is just the 300,000 applications that Lucia was describing, including the rejections. I mean, I don't keep the rejections, but I could attach the rejections in that folder as well. But I don't think it's possible to succeed in this field without really being willing to work hard and being able to pick yourself up in the face of, I think, challenges, because the path isn't linear.
Let me turn it to that. Great pieces of advice. Let me turn it to Floriane. Same question, advice to yourself, and of course, feel free to jump in on the related questions, I'm calling them.
Yeah, well, I think, I agree with basically everything that has been said. And I think a lot of really good points, including most recently from Achiume, like believe in yourself is obviously very important. And I think I would tie this to follow your dream and be curious. Because I get a lot of calls being in a law firm, people who really want to be in the law firm without really questioning whether that's the right fit for them, just because you go to law school and sort of the traditional path is really just to go to a law firm. And then the second question that I get is, how do I maximize my chances of doing well in a law firm? Like, are there classes that I should take it? Like, it's good to be strategic, but I also think that following your heart is probably the best thing that you can do. And also being curious, because there are pathways, there are career paths that exist out of law firm. And obviously, the panelist here at this event is obviously a very good representation of that. There's so many ways that you can achieve your dreams and your goals, if this is indeed your passion, than just going to a law firm. So I would just really strongly encourage people just to be curious. And I think that really ties in to the mentorship, because when I started my career, as I said, I was working in-house. I didn't really have any idea of what the other options were outside of a law firm. And if I had perhaps been a little bit more curious, or had talked to perhaps more people, then perhaps I would I would have landed in a different place. I don't know. I'm happy to be where I am, but I think there's so much to gain from having those discussions. and just opening those doors. And I think you need to be also proactive. I think that's also a point about mentorship that I think was made by Karen and also others, is you have to be proactive. You can't just wait for people to come to you. And I think the landscape of mentorship has really evolved over the years. When I started my career, mentorship was more on an ad hoc basis. You really had to knock on the door of your colleague or your friend or a connection that somebody knows and put you in touch. Now there's a really wonderful amount of networks. Obviously ASOL is one of them. There's also Arbitral Woman, that is also an organization that really promotes women in that particular space. There's also the Pledge. There are so many efforts that are made to really provide some mentorship opportunities, and I think you should really try to take advantage of all of them.
Thank you. I do want to raise a question that is one raised in a Q&A, but also one that we had thought about as well, which is sort of a balance question. And it's particular to international law, because as the person who wrote into the Q&A noted, sometimes with international law, there's these challenges of you have to travel, very far away, or you have to take a post that is outside of the country for some period of time. And whether it's that you have, your own children or a spouse, or you have parents or just family or friends, right? What are the particular challenges, and how have you addressed those? Does anybody want to just come off mute and chime in on that?
I'm happy to give it a try, since I have children and spouse, and I would say choose your spouse wisely, because I think having a supportive spouse who is also curious and adventurous. So early in my marriage, when I decided, okay, I really want to be out there, and went to applied for the ABA Sealy position. I think I may have applied for Hungary, but I ended up in Armenia, and my spouse says, yes, let's do it, right? And also came with me. And it ended up being, as I said, a transformative experience. And then as we've had children, being supportive in childcare and other things, while also having his career, so being able to trade off. So having a partner who is perhaps not bound by the traditional concepts of who does the caretaking, who does particular roles within the family. So once again, choose that partner wisely, and think about, for your children, traveling to somewhere else. You could transform their lives, being able to see life in more than one domestic situation, that is life in the US versus going to another country and living there, speaking with other children, living with other children, and you're expanding their world. So see it as a gift. You're giving a gift to both of you, because you're acquainting them really intimately with the global world.
Great point. Anybody else want to jump off? E.Tendayi?
Yeah, so I and I don't know that I have advice, because I feel like I'm in it right now. So I'm a recent birth parent, right? So being a woman, being a parent, being a birth parent, and kind of that intersection is a really intense one. We had a child about a year and a half ago, and I remember, and not just remember, even now I'm looking at more senior women in international law who have children, and I'm thinking to myself, how is it that they are, and that they have done this, some of them multiple children, because it is incredibly difficult and challenging for all of the reasons that I think are laid out in the person who's asking that question. And I think that one of the things that has been surprising to me is how little institutional space and conversation there is within international law for exactly that intersection. And it's not just about parental leave, for example. It's about all of the things that are unsaid and all of the things that you are managing at any given moment that are in very profound tension with professionalism, where professionalism is basically structured around the experiences of privileged elite men, right? So it's a constant struggle. And I know what I'm trying to navigate right now is how much I want. It's tough. On the one hand, I feel very private about my private life, and I really appreciate that. At the same time, it feels political, and I want to bring it into the professional space and put on the table care responsibilities and other dynamics that I do believe we need to think about creating different professional space on. So I'm in the space of kind of figuring out how I want to fight that battle. And here mentorship and communities is really important. So constantly being in conversation with other women, other birth parents about the battles they're fighting has been really, really fortunate. But also recently I've been valuing all of, valuing family, valuing all of the responsibilities that I have as a very important counter to the work that we do. There can be something incredibly consuming about careers in international law, especially when you're working on some of the most pressing issues in the world in ways that I think can take you further and further away from an embodied life and from meaning and from joy. And so it's interesting now when I'm thinking about how I can't get to that email that I was supposed to respond to because I have to label the socks before the kid goes to school. I think to myself about the joys of labeling socks, especially if the world is about to end. Maybe that's not a bad way to go out. So I guess my comments are less advice and more solidarity to say, I think this is a really, it's tough. It's tough. I don't think anyone has solutions yet, but I find it valuable to have spaces where at least I can let it out a little bit, which I've just done as a result of the question. So thanks for asking that question.
You're welcome. We only have a few minutes left, but I do wonder if one of our our remaining panelists might wish to jump in on this question or a related question of, this is one challenge that women attorneys face, right? Are there others that you'd like to, share? Maybe just, obviously we don't have time to do this question justice, but just, a couple of minutes, anybody.
Maybe I can chip in and just related to the other question and maybe a way to tie them together. I'm a single mom and I don't know how I do it. I just know that I plan my days as much as I can. I didn't choose my partner very well, but I definitely make it happen. I have a very happy kid. I can, he's a happy boy, and I'm a happy mom, and I'm a happy lawyer, and I'm a happy sister. So I try to live all of my like my facets, my roles intensely. When I'm mom, I'm full-time mom. And as soon as I drop him at the school, I'm full-time lawyer, full-time, and I just try not to mix the worlds as much as I can, just to enjoy each one in their own right? So I give each one the time and as much energy as I have. And I try to sort of have, that's what has worked for me. That's, the way I've managed to do it. I also have a huge support network. I have a lot of friends. I have especially other women, other moms, who are there always ready to help you because they know what it feels. So I have many friends. I just call them. I just, can you stay with him because I'm running late or things like that. And that has, has been the only way for me to be able to do, all the things that I try to do. And I also always,
great
add
advice.
more. I have to. You have to create a network, definitely. And the other thing is perhaps to connect this. I think that we have to be also mentors too, right? We've had so many mentors along the way. Now it's our turn to be mentors, and by being mentors, I mean also thinking about these things, And as Tendayi was saying, okay, how do we change this? How do we move? How do we, have a more institutionalized, response to the challenges that we face as women in international law? So, that's our job, and also is our job. And I think that perhaps this is the last thing. We have to enjoy the process. I try to enjoy the process. I try to wake up every day and say, okay, how am I going to change the world today? And try, to be really, like intentional about it. I wake up, with that in mind every day. And even the rejections and even the emails not replied to and things like that. Now I've learned that it's part of learning. It's part of being a better lawyer. It's part of being a better professional. It's part of being a better mom too. So, so all of those things sort of tie up together, and it's going to work out. That's what I, tell all my students, and like, the mentees when I've been a mentor in the WILIG program, which by the way, and that's an answer to a question, we already closed applications, but maybe you can send me an email and I can tell you other ways to apply, or apply next year or something. Don't stay there, don't go away. And and just enjoy being living your life, being your the lawyer you want to be. You can change tracks many times. It's okay at any age. And you'll make it. Just believe in it.
Well, thank you, Lucia. I'm afraid we are out of time. We clearly need to do this again, and we have some excellent panelists, and I am so grateful to all of you for taking time out of your busy days to be with us and to share with the young professionals out there who are looking for this sort of input and advice and insights from all of you. I also thank, of course, ASIL for supporting this, and for our co-sponsors, MILIG, AIG, and the New Professionals Interest Groups. We're also making a recording of this, so we will be sharing that with those who could not make it today to watch it live with us. And I hope that everyone will keep an eye out for more WILIG announcements, because we have other great programming upcoming. And I thank all of you so much, and have a great day.
Thank you.